DC Comics has a long tradition of doing crisis events. There's always a crisis. The time frame between the crises have obviously shortened as time has gone on, and we are coming up towards Dark Crisis. But there's a problem. Dark Crisis really doesn't mean anything, and there's a lot of reasons behind that. I've discussed a lot of them here and there, but I haven't put a whole video together. Recently, there was an article at newsaraba.com which kind of articulated some of the issues, and I thought was a good starting point. I would have formatted it a little bit different, but I'm going to read it as is. I'm going to go through the paragraphs that are here, and I'm going to give you my opinions and explain why Dark Crisis is a failed event before it's even started. It's not Joshua Williams' fault. It's DC Comics leadership and their editorial staff's fault. They wanted a crisis event, but they didn't want to commit to it. This does not set well with me, and I imagine it doesn't set well with a vast majority of DC Comics fans. If you want to have a crisis, you want to kill off the Justice League, you kill them off. You don't have them continue on their ongoing titles in real time where we say this Dark Crisis happens in the future. We've already read Future State, and we hated it. Now let's get into everything wrong with Dark Crisis as stated by Newsaraba. Like I said, I'm going to read the article, and then I'm going to give you my opinions. In April, the Justice League will die in Justice League 75 in a story leading into the big DC event of 2022, Dark Crisis, mostly focused on a world without a Justice League following in their deaths, and to show the world it ain't kidding around, DC is canceling the Justice League series with that issue. Unless there's any lingering doubt, the publisher is on record saying the death of the Justice League story is in continuity. Well, kind of. The Justice League actually dies a bit in the future of the DCU. How far in the future? Well, besides some lead-in one-shots in May, the members of the Justice League who died in April, necessitating the cancellation of the team title in May, are still kicking around their own series that same month. And in June too, except in the monthly Flash series, which kicks off a storyline in June set after the death of the Justice League, tying into Dark Crisis, which again is set a bit in the future. This is DC Comics wanting to have their cake and eat it too. That doesn't ever work. They are killing off the Justice League, and they're ending the Justice League title for a few months, which they should have already been doing anyway. Brian Michael Bendis had essentially destroyed that comic book. It had no sales anymore. Comic book crises are the DC Comics thing. No one in the world of comic books should know how to pull off a crisis better than DC. If you want to make the deaths meaningful, which apparently they do because it is in continuity, we should care about these characters dying off, then you have to go at it all the way. But they can't not have Bruce Wayne in a Batman comic, so you got to have Bruce Wayne. And we can't end what we're doing with Superman. He's on Warworld, which I do think is a fantastic story. And there is a bit of a problem with Superman being on Warworld. How's he going to be in the Justice League and go die with them? Well, it's set in a bit in the future. And hey, Wonder Woman just had the trial of the Amazons, and we said that was important. How are we going to make that important if we're killing off the Justice League? Well, we'll just put it off into the future. Where in the future? Who knows? In 5 years, when we're reading these solo titles again, are they finally going to catch up and we're going to see all these heroes dead? Of course not, because we're going to be on the 4th or 5th crisis that's happened since then. So they know that they could we'll just put it off in the future. We'll not commit to the actual story that we're telling, and we'll just make it ambiguous and say it's in continuity, but it's in future continuity. This omniverse bullshit is the death of DC Comics creativity and their continuity. They no longer have to talk to each other. They no longer have to communicate. They no longer have to plan to even kill off the Justice League anymore. So to recap, in June, the Justice League's Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, and Aquaman are dead in Dark Crisis #1. The Flash 783 and the tie-in series Dark Crisis Young League, which all happened sometime after June's Batman 124, Detective Comics 1061, Action Comics 1044, and Aquaman #5, in which those lead characters are alive, even though their deaths were in a standard DC ongoing series in April. Got all that? Now let's be fair. Death of the Justice League and Dark Crisis writer Joshua Williamson has said the storyline is about more than just killing some superheroes. Quote, it's about the characters and the relationships that we've seen built over DC's great history. Well, I hate to break it to DC Comics and Joshua Williamson, who I'm a fan of, but that's not what you're selling the book on. You're selling the book on the death of the Justice League and it being important, and you're completely undermining it at the exact same time. And it's a complete fallacy, whether Joshua Williamson wants to believe or admit it or not, that this is celebrating the characters or the history of the relationships that have been built over the years of the DC Comics universe. This is about celebrating new characters that have all been introduced within the last 5 years, for the most part. I do believe Jackson Hyde might have showed up just a little bit earlier in that DC Rebirth #1. But this is all about celebrating new characters that DC Comics believe are superior and more in line with what they would like their publishing house to be. They don't like the classic heroes because they're too monolithic. They're a little bit too white. They're a little bit too straight. We got to get these new heroes in here. We got to get a little JLQ going. Stop trying to sell us on what this isn't. It's not about the death of the Justice League. It's not about history. It's not about characters. It's not about relationships. It's about replacing these characters, if you can, even temporarily, and hope that maybe the idea takes before you have to replace them all again, which Marvel Comics has already done and already had to do. It makes no sense whatsoever, and it absolutely cuts the nuts off of Dark Crisis before it even begins. Justice League 75 attracted a lot of attention, and we mean a lot, with the news that most of DC's most iconic superheroes would die. And in the initial announcement, Williamson seemed aware of the question DC-savvy readers would immediately begin asking, proactively promising it was the real deal. Quote, "We want people to understand this is serious, and this is going to have a major impact in the DCU moving forward." Adding later that the Justice League monthly series would be absent for an extended period, Williamson added, "It's going to be a while, and that's going to be a major part of what the DCU looks like after this story." Do you really believe once Dark Crisis is over that all the DC comics are going to skip ahead to this undetermined time, at least now, point in the future of the DC universe, and we're going to start fresh there? Absolutely not. There's no way they're going to do this. They literally already tried it with Future State, and it didn't work. And to lie and say that this is a major part of the DCU moving forward, where it's not having impacts on the other titles with these heroes at the exact same time. You've removed all the stakes. You've removed the buy-in factor from the audience. You're feeding us bullshit, and if you aren't, you're fucking stupid and you don't know how to actually do an event. DC Comics are the ones trying to sell Dark Crisis like this, yet they expect us to just buy all their bullshit. Like we haven't been reading comic books long enough to see through all the holes in this entire story that they're trying to sell us right now. But the story, quote, takes place a bit in the future of the DCU, unquote. And we got to take a second to note here, DC has never officially announced this. That was left to a tweet by Williamson that wasn't mentioned in the Entertainment Weekly story or any DC announcements or marketing material for Dark Crisis since. And since for the most part, the contemporary DCU titles starring these characters will not reflect their demise in absence, the question then becomes, when and how will the future become the past if it's never the present? That's a factor in wrapping our heads around what Dark Crisis is and what Dark Crisis is not. The fact that they know coming into this, that this story isn't happening at the same time as their in-continuity stories are, yet they claim it is in continuity, that is lying to people. And the fact that Williamson let it out in a tweet, but DC never included it in any of their official marketing to let customers know. Not every DC reader or customer is as informed as you and I are, where we keep up on these things and are aware of all the holes in DC Comics story. How can you honestly say with a straight face that what is happening in Dark Crisis matters and that it's in continuity and it will have a major impact in the DC universe if it happens in a distant moment in the future? Events are supposed to be important and they're supposed to be impactful because they send ripples throughout the entire continuity, through the entire line of comic books that are being published. This should be having effects not only in Batman, Superman, Aquaman, Flash, everything. Every solo title should be impacted by this. You're losing the Trinity. You're killing the Trinity off. You're killing Aquaman off. You're killing off the original Justice League members. The ones that survived should be broken by a moment like this. Losing Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman at the same time, that would kill the spirits of any hero in the DC universe. Now, that has the makings of an interesting story, but they've dropped the ball from the get-go, and there's no way to get your head around this to where it makes sense to what they're actually saying is going to be true. It's not going to be impactful. It doesn't matter, and that is a problem. At this point, it looks almost certain DC is taking the death metal approach here. And that isn't a matter of good or bad or right or wrong, just A or B. DC says Death of the Justice League and Dark Crisis is in continuity. Okay, so the next question is simply how, when, and in what way will it have a major impact on the DCU moving forward? outside of its own pages? You have to ask those questions for DC continuity these days, but we're looking forward to the answers. I'm not looking forward to the answers. I'm glad that the writing staff of Newsarama are more hopeful and optimistic about this than I am. But none of it makes sense. And taking the death metal approach to anything, I think, is fool's gold. It's a folly. Death metal sucked. Dark Knight's metal was interesting because it was the first time, and there was a definitive winner. You know, there was some interesting stuff to come out of there, and it was all flushed down the drain with death metal. That event sucked. I don't care if the art was good. There was 2 good issues, and they weren't even part of the main story. They were kind of side quests that were going on. To take this approach and play loose and fast with your continuity and your history and your characters like this, to mess with your readers, to try and tell your customers one thing when you know something else is happening. Like I said, not everybody is as informed as you and I are. Not everyone's going to know heading in that this whole event is bullshit. And that is the real danger awaiting DC Comics at the end of Dark Crisis. People are going to notice that all the heroes are still alive in the continuity. With their solo titles, the only one tying in is the Flash. Just normal readers that aren't as into comic books like you and I and aren't informed coming into this are going to feel put off. They're going to feel like they got screwed over. They're going to feel like they were lied to. How many readers are DC Comics going to turn away forever with this type of marketing and publicity stunt where they know going in that there's no way they can actually deliver what they're selling? It's not in continuity. It doesn't matter, and it's not going to have a major impact on the DCU. DC Comics might as well rename Dark Crisis Snake Oil, because that's exactly what they're selling us here. It's nothing, and it doesn't matter. If you need reminding why the death metal approach is a terrible approach for DC Comics moving forward, my good friend Perch and I talked about it at the end of that event, all the things that kind of went right with it, mostly what went wrong with it. The video's right here. It's about 20 minutes long. We go over this thing in depth, and we really talk about why this didn't work out.